I am here tonight with the most important person in the entire world, who's also the most intimidating guest I can imagine, the most brilliant person I've ever known, the largest influence on my life, my spouse, Estephanie. Gracias por tu tiempo esta noche, mi amor.
I love it. Well, now I don't know what to say after that. Are you proposing again? No, but it's genuinely a really big honor, and I'm really glad that you asked for me to join you. I felt like you would, but still, I think I feel very butterfly about it. Maybe like you want me on your podcast. Yeah, you've been a really big influence in my life, and I've grown a lot being with you, and I've also watched you grow a lot too. In the ways in which you've been really transparent and vulnerable online, doing really good work. So I'm glad to be a part of that.
I'm glad you're here. I also wondered if you wanted to just introduce yourself a little. Who are you?
So my name is Estephanie Marol. I am a daughter and child of an immigrant on my mother's side, coming from Venezuela, and her mother coming from Venezuela, and her mother coming from Venezuela. On my father's side, William is Venezuelan Afro-Indigenous. His mother from Venezuelan Afro-Indigenous, and her mother as well. And I'm the firstborn here in the U.S. or Turtle Island. Yeah, I don't know. I come from a winding road from, Venezuela. In particular, a lot of my family's from Caracas or outside of Caracas, a small town called Cuba. And also my lineage is, of the Kumanagoto people, of the Guaregua clan and the Anzoátegui territories of Venezuela. Very Caribbean. And from through there to Boston to Maine. Been here for 8 years. So my family has followed. I don't know, what else do I say about myself? I'm really in love with this person here and related to a big part of who I am and what I love. And through this relationship as well is this deep love for language as a way in which I've learned so much. Portals have opened for me in so many ways through language, and simultaneously has been, within those realms have also been places where I've been deeply hurt as well. And all of the amalgamation of those things really intrigue me. I'm a little bit maybe obsessed in a particular way. But I will say that more specifically, language as it relates to world building, language as it relates to, I said world building, and I'm thinking about our gaming and different things. It's just so related, and this is what I mean. But yeah, language related to world building and worldviews, ideology, language as insight to our insecurities and our fears, and language as insight to our internalized value systems, language as it relates to imagination and dreaming, creation and mythology as in how does language hold the mythologies of our worldviews and guidance like North Stars, and also language as it relates to tension and conflict. A lot of the work that I do these days for the last, 5-6 years has been trying to connect what I learn every day, my own experiences as land and water and stardust, and also my experiences living on land and off land and natural systems, and connecting that to language. And I have this fascination with tracking the disconnections in that, and also the intersections in that, and also the confluences of all those threads through organizational systems specifically. Organizational systems, and even more specifically, like the relationships within them. How are the relationships, the way that we're thinking about relationships and the values that we put on relationships reflective in the structures and the systems that we have in our organizations and vice versa. I feel like that was a long-winded.
It's beautiful. So Stephanie's run an organizational company called Myco Rising for many years now, which helps organizations navigate conflict, shift governance models from hierarchies into egalitarian systems, support more impacted and historically disenfranchised people within those organizations, do a bunch of different work. So their work is all over the world and incredibly powerful. That love of words leads us neatly into the next parts of this podcast. We were friends for many years before we fell in love. And as we were falling in love, I remember you saying to me so specifically how you are the land. Your body is the body of the earth. And your clarity about that was incredibly striking to me, because before we ever touched each other, I think you were very explicit. You were like, the way you touch me is the way you engage with the earth, and the way you engage with the earth around our home is the way you engage with me. And it had a huge impact on me and my thinking. It very much made me fall in love with you more, which weaves, I think, into some of why we treat each other with the level of care and intention that you'll see over this podcast, because we do our best to embody that. One of us often learning more than the other. Or maybe that's the wrong way to put it.
Yeah, you wanted to go through our contract, yeah?
I do want to go through our contract. So we have a relational contract, which is built on the idea that all relationships are a contract, are an agreement between people. And we wanted to be very specific and transparent about what our contract was and what it wasn't. So we put a lot of time into developing a contract with a number of different sections and a number of agreements within it, which we will get to and we'll walk through in detail, and we'll tell you why we did each section and what each section covers. We'll read the sections for you. But before we get to that, our relationship, one of the things that it's built on is check-ins. We check in with each other typically every day, and then once a week we have a longer, more formal check-in, and then we have sort of more large check-ins at theoretically seasonal intervals, but they happen sort of sporadically.
Yeah.
But the daily check-ins are a huge part of our life. And we figured the best way to do that was just to role model what that looked like. So you got time to do a check-in?
Yeah.
What are you feeling grateful for today?
I'm going first. Okay.
Oh, you can put it back on me if you want.
Let me just lean into that. I think the very, very first thing I'm getting emotional about is really, really fresh, which is news about some kind of ceasefire resolution.
Yeah.
In Palestine. I'm feeling a lot of gratitude.
Yeah. Same.
And I'd say just thinking about this moment and also thinking about the day, just feeling a lot of gratitude for a little bit more spaciousness and presence that I was feeling in my body as I was moving through the day. And also gratitude. Those two things somehow link to gratitude for an opportunity more intentionally on today, which is actually our anniversary, for picture slideshow of years in review between us, as I was talking to my sister and I was talking to Cassandra. Just thinking about that and feeling really proud and very grateful too. Very grateful, especially for the responses, in that I think that there's something really honest and super powerful in both of their responses for that. I think it just means a lot to me.
This is your younger sister and your best friend.
Yeah. So I'm feeling gratitude for.
It was beautiful.
What are you feeling grateful for?
Ooh, I'm feeling grateful for 5 years with you. It was 5 years ago today that we stepped into a relationship together, and I am very grateful for that. And you brought me flowers today, and I love that. I'm grateful for our safe, beautiful home, clean water, and good food. I'm grateful for community around us. I'm grateful for the chance to share some of our relationship, which is the single largest influence in my entire life. Grateful for those things.
I can join you in that.
What's impacting you today?
I think such large news. The ceasefire in Palestine. It's impacting me. I'm feeling impacted by the fires happening in California. Really feeling for families and communities out there. I'm really feeling for other parts of Turtle Island and Navigala that have also had fires, and that activating past potential traumas around that for other communities. I was thinking about that a lot today. I feel impacted by the change that's really, rapidly approaching in our life on a smaller scale there. I'm excited. I'm just feeling that really present and wondering like what's happening next. And, puzzle pieces are finally falling into place. And that is kind of like impactful, both like positively and also like there's like what does that mean kind of feeling. Yeah, and the snow is almost gone.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm also impacted by our upcoming move. A lot of moving pieces there. It's how we're spending our days. I'm impacted by the fact that Merlin's not here. I still just feel the absence of that dog. Having 2 dogs now feels odd.
Yeah.
I feel his absence and I feel his presence. And I feel impacted by the rise of global fascism and the climate catastrophe that we're living through, and how all of these things impact my body and make it hard to wake up and move through each day. I feel impacted by my own insecurities and my own doubts. I'm impacted by family drama and community drama and all the dramas, and a close friend of ours who was just in a car accident. I think she might still be in the hospital, impacted by that. Those are all things that are impacting me this evening. Whew. What are you looking forward to?
I am looking forward to. I don't know how much we can say on your podcast or what limitations are or whatever. But I am looking forward to our move, to new friendships and relationships. I am looking forward to travel and a beach. I am looking forward to a free Palestine. And a free Congo and a free Sudan. Yeah.
I'm all in on all of those. Also looking forward to going to the Caribbean next month for a few weeks. That'll be delightful. I'm looking forward to all those things. Free Palestine, cuddling up tonight. Everything delightful in the world.
Yeah.
That is sort of how we start every day. Touching base with what we're feeling grateful for to ground in that. Going through what's affecting us and preventing us from being present, or what we need to be present with that's painful. And then naming what we're looking forward to so that we're facing in a healthy direction to start our day. So we often do that over coffee. It grounds our whole relationship.
Yeah. It's also, I'm trying to remember that people are listening. And I'm not just what else? I think it also, all those things are true. And it's also an opportunity for us to name even more specific things, I think, in our relationship from previous days, from the night, from the morning, things that we didn't catch then, or, kind of feeling some way about, or something like that. We can just put a pin in, at least acknowledge like, oh, I feel this about that thing. Like, can we put a pin in it? It's impacting me,
And this is specifically to prevent things from building up underneath the surface, so that if I'm feeling frustrated, if I have appreciations or tensions or anything on my heart in our relationship, this is a space every single day for us to name. I'm still feeling a little affected by that thing that I felt that was rude that you did yesterday, or whatever, a hard conversation that we had. And often our weekly check-in is a much more intentional space for those, that we put things into put a bookmark in for the, many hours of time on Sundays. But at least we can name it. The point of our check-ins is not to solve these problems. We're not actually trying to solve anything most of the time. We're just naming. Sometimes if it's really specific, we might ask if the other person needs any support around it, or if there's anything that we want to do differently about that today, or if there's any conversations we need to make more time for in the short term. But in general, it's really just to name and hold space for whatever those impacts are. Without that, we feel effects almost immediately. We go 2-3 days without a check-in and we feel really disconnected.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, we feel disconnected, and then that it's like somehow allows for then things to feel like a more of a pressure cooker,
Right.
or like there's a lot more underneath it, so it comes out sideways in different spaces or different conversations, and we're like, oh yeah, I actually had this thing, you know.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. And you'll notice, name challenges that we face in our relationship all through this. So our entire contract is getting in front of challenges and facing challenges that we've shared. So we're going to mention challenges all through this, but some of the things that in particular our daily check-ins address are my own insecurities. Both of us are super sensitive. And when Estephanie's feeling some type of way about whatever's going on, I can tell. And when we have check-ins, Stephanie can say, I've just had a really crappy meeting at work, and so I'm feeling frustrated about that. And then I know where that sense that I'm picking up is coming from, and vice versa. And that keeps me sane, prevents me from just running in little circles being like, oh, is our relationship, is there something that we're not talking about? Is something building up? It also gives us a space that's intentional to name hard things, which is hard. So giving that space every day goes a long way.
mm-hmm.
Move into the contract.
Yeah.
So we're going to explain why we wrote each section, and then we'll read each section. We'll do those one at a time. And do you want to do the first one? You want me to do the first one?
I think you should do the first one.
Okay. So the first section of our marriage contract is titled Intentions. Why did we feel it was important to start with intentions?
Why did we feel it was important to start with intentions?
I think that our thoughts shape our words and our actions. And by specifying what the intentions of the rest of the document are, we set a tone. So it's giving a lens through which to read the rest of the document.
Yeah, totally. That is a correct answer.
Yes.
No, but no, I agree with that. Wanting to be clear about what we're even writing for.
Right.
Yeah.
So the first section goes, we choose each other as partners in the deepest layers of healing and growth, grounding our pedagogies and epistemologies relationally within the intimate, safe, and committed space we foster through integrity, trust, and the practice of love. The sections of this document are mirrors of the global healing that we envision and work to embody. Humanization, mutual aid, respect, protections, solidarity, etc. This document is many things, and one of them is a representation of the work that we see as necessary in the world at the scale of our most personal relationship. The proactive engagement of healing and growth looks like the honest excavation of our pasts, gentle pushing of edges, compassionate inquiry, and continuous calling in.
Mm-hmm. The next section is called Foundational Praxis and Boundaries. This is around our conversation. You're like, oh my gosh, endless conversations about like agreements in general, and in the dominant culture of white supremacy or white ignorance has so much control in it. This desire for control of everything, and especially relationships.
Yeah.
And that sometimes shows up as, well, I want agreements. And it's like, well, I want rules. And like, if you break them, this is what we're going to do when you break them. Like that kind of thing. And then the agreements become like, well, we need to make sure that we catch every loophole so that this is a safe space.
Yeah.
And how that in and of itself just creates, the foundation itself is
controlling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To push against that, I think that we had come up with this section to be like, okay, but what is the fundamental, instead of creating this document as like trying to catch the loopholes, what are the foundational pieces of this? And I think one of the largest foundations is assumption of best intent in our relationship that we've both stepped in with yeses. Yeah, to really lean into what is natural about ourselves and where we're coming from and what we're coming with in the practice of love, per our intentions, to allow for the authenticity of the unraveling and the unlearning as part of the practice of love, and trusting that we're going to be learning how to then set our boundaries and name, our limits and all this other stuff, right? But making that a more natural process in the act of trust and love.
Yeah, absolutely. And defining it as other than that effort at control, really saying what it is. Yeah, everything you just said, please.
So this section reads, the praxis of our boundaries rests on assumption of best intent and is expressed in the document by seeking to clarify our practices and commitments, and not attempting to close any potential loopholes to blind or fix our relationship. Another foundation of praxis is dynamicism, meaning that we expect our boundaries will change and grow. As we change and grow, so will this document. This document is a living one, a representation of our initial agreements in this relationship, and future iterations will reflect their evolution. As spouses, we seek to see and support the best in one another. While we are committing to the deepest good faith efforts of maintenance and support that we are capable of, we will not sacrifice our own overall health and wellness for the sake of this union. To do so would be to violate a foundational intention.
I love that.
This is fun for us because, we wrote the contract, we shared it. That was a beautiful process, even getting to be like, I think that was part of our marriage, was actually the process of the contract.
Writing it.
Yeah.
Yeah, in many ways, that was like the formation, the foundation of this is our agreement. This is
right.
it. The next section is our commitments. I feel like this is pretty self-explanatory. These are our commitments to one another. Is there anything else to be said about that?
I don't think so.
Cool. Number 1, shared prayer. From our friendship, we grew close in ceremony, and it was our prayers, spirit, and our ancestors who shaped our lives so that we were ready for one another, and then wove our paths closer and closer together. So we joyfully choose each other as conspirators in prayer, and commit to the continued practice. We trust in spirit, the goddess, to hold us, our ancestors to guide us, and our own divinities to embody their will. We commit to the practice of continual awareness, invitation, celebration, and relationship with the Creator Goddess, our ancestral lineages, and our genuine selves through the ongoing humanization of one another. We commit to prayer as one of our first responses to conflict and questions in our relationship.
Mm-hmm. And the second commitment is collaborative growth. We acknowledge and consent to be shaped by our relationship as expressions of our respect, co-arising, and desire to co-create the world we want to live in. We joyfully practice the conscious process of being influenced by one another. This can look like openly sharing the directions that we are focusing on growing in and exploring and sharing what support looks like for ourselves. In the practice of self and relational care, we commit to sharing the impacts of each other's actions with as much transparency as possible in order to better inform our process of collaborative visioning, self-awareness, and growth. Being shaped by our relationship also looks like explicitly inviting feedback. The conscientious practice of expanding our capacity to hear when we have hurt or caused harm, and doing our best to integrate what we learn into our process and behaviors. All this is an expression of our trust, our respect, and support for one another. To willingly continue to shape ourselves and to take one another's perspectives into deep consideration in the process of our paths. Sharing our growth also means we commit to communicating about the evolutions of our processes as we are aware of them with transparency, consideration, and continued success in mind. This means that we no longer undertake large decisions, directions, and changes alone. Some examples of this would be pets, housing, jobs, or buying or selling of vehicles, or land, educational programs, relationship agreements, and evolutions of our own identities. Collaborative growth also means that we commit to put in good faith effort to acknowledge and or engage in relational growth bids, such as dancing and educational opportunities, adventures, somatics, and therapy.
Mm-hmm. 3. Mutual aid. We seek to practice a radical self-awareness through our relationship, leveraging our union to see ourselves more clearly, our privileges, our traumas, our patterns, our ancestral legacies, our mythologies, and all our relationships. We choose to practice continuously betraying the inherited privileges and practices that cause ongoing harm, and to continuously embrace the ways of being that align us with the healthier communities and world that we seek. Central to this is the practice of mutual aid. We joyfully commit to supporting one another from a place of balanced reciprocity. The expressions of this will evolve, but examples generally take 2 forms. The first is the shared work of our lives together, like housework, child rearing, emotional labor, communal relationships, pet care, intimacy, home, etc. The second is individual support, such as support with professional work, physical, mental, and spiritual health, creative endeavors, and other personal projects and growth. We embody mutual aid as a form of countergrowth against colonial patriarchal models of transactional value. This means offering without expectation of equal value return. We simply commit to supporting one another as a practice of faith that when we engage from a place of abundance and generosity in our central relationship, our needs will be met by the weave of all our relationships in community. Throughout all these forms of co-rising, another expression of mutual aid is the practice of solidarity. We commit to having each other's backs, to working for and with one another, and avoiding working against or at odds with one another. This takes the form of mutually supportive parenting, familial relations, animal husbandry, land tending, and community engagement. We support one another.
Number 4, respect and honor. We excitedly commit to honoring and respecting one another. And this work starts from a disadvantage within our patriarchal culture. Honor and respect require a grounded and persistent awareness of our relative positionality, including our identities, privileges, and traumas. They also mean seeing one another beyond our relative positionalities, just as 2 human beings. It is the pluralistic holding of these pieces that allow us to engage from a place of holistic respect, honoring, and humanization. We are working to learning our inherent worth. This includes the awareness and practice of knowing that our bodies are deserving of love and lovable, that our bodies are deserving of touch, connection, worship, play, health, joy, ecstasy, and deep and unconditional love. This looks like taking time to understand and express our own needs and desires, myriad and new forms of joyful motion and connection, prayerful and intentional relationships with food, and regular celebration, affirmations, and mutual worship of ourselves and one another. We are working on understanding the connectivities that weave through every aspect of our lives. This includes the impacts that our communication and lack of communications have on one another and our communities. Beyond the superficial, this connectivity of communications extends into the subtlety of implications, contexts, and tones. What is the messaging underneath and behind what we say and don't say? Understanding connectivity also includes the awareness and reaction to the connections between our relative identities and our historical positionalities. Another part of our commitment to honoring and respecting one another is the practice of unconditional love. What does love mean to us? This is a practice of countergrowth against the transactional or conditional models of love taught by patriarchy. We understand that there is a way we are healing from both unhealthy role modeling of love we experience in society, media, and our childhoods, and also the idealized versions of love we constructed in response. So we practice simply loving one another exactly as we are, and apart from any perceived benefit that we feel or role that our partner may seem to fill for us. Damn.
Some days we do better than others.
Yeah, it's true. It's true.
Number 5, communication. We joyfully commit to the highest level of honesty, transparency, and clarity that we are capable of within our marriage. This is undertaken with the understanding that our capacity is both dynamic and evolving. So this does not mean that we will always communicate at our peak capacity. It does mean that we will always make our best good faith effort to communicate well from both sides, both the speaker and the listener, working to excavate and illuminate the deepest layers of truth that we can touch together. We commit to practicing receiver-oriented communication, both in the sense of listening into and through one another's words to what they are pointing towards, and in the sense of communicating from a place of seeking shared understanding rather than a performance or transmitter-oriented mindset. Language is a tool for communication, but that is a secondary use at best. Our primary use of language is in our own internal construction of a worldview. Foundational to our commitments around communication together is the work of understanding one another's worldviews, historical, present, and developing. We commit to working towards hearing one another through the speaker's use of language rather than solely through our own.
The next one is called protections. I think that this one is really just speaking to acknowledgement of where we come from, parts of where we come from, like what we bring with us, and our attempts to use the mechanisms of healing and community care that we can lean into to trust our community and people close to us to catch us. I think there was like a faith in that when we were putting protections together.
Yeah, and an embodied affirmation and expression of the fact that relationships are not private.
Yeah.
Relationships are functions of community. And so this is a way in which our relationship is tied directly to our community, as will become clear as we go through this.
Yeah. All right. While we focus on the intentions of our union, we are also cognizant of our own histories to the best of our abilities. We both grew up in physically and emotionally abusive households where manipulation and abuse were normalized and role modeled for us. While we both have years of parsing and tending the seeds of health that have been passed on to us to carry, we've also embodied unhealthy relationship dynamics in our adult lives. We are aware of how notoriously difficult it can be to see elements of dysfunction or abuse from inside of a relationship. So because of this, we were asking a number of people that we deeply trust to form a marriage council for us. And this council would convene either at one of our requests, which would indicate a very serious need, or automatically in a response to any of the situations that we outlined below. This council has ultimate agency over our union, meaning that they have the agency to dissolve our union or any specific part of it, either temporarily as part of a process or permanently. The elements that they have agency over include, but are not limited to, are romantic, cohabitative, parental, sexual, and or legal relationship. By placing our union in the hands of this council, we are practicing a healthier culture, collective accountability and awareness for the sake of each other's health and wellness, and for the sake of our community's understanding of what relationship is and is not. It is the presumption that none of these events are possible, which allows them to be normalized and continue in our lives and community. So we intentionally address their possibility here as an act of growth and allyship for ourselves and our community. So the events that would trigger the convening of this council are abuse. So including physical, emotional, verbal, sexual, financial, and any other action that harms, controls, or manipulates one another. And number 2 is abandonment, including physical, emotional, financial, and any other that leaves one of us effectively alone. Upon any of these occurring, we are obligated to inform the council, which would then convene in response. We ask that the council ask as many questions as possible, listen to us both with open hearts, then assess the situation as holistically as is reasonably possible, and direct us in how we move forward with our individual and collective best interests at heart. In the event of abuse, we commit to cease cohabitation and contact until directed otherwise by the council. We each also have the authority to convene the council based on other events unidentified in this document, but meeting the threshold of severity established by the examples herein. The council being composed of some of the most emotionally skilled and well-trained people we know. We trust the council to determine its own modes of governance. We suggest consensus as a model and trust their judgment. We consent to be bound by their decisions. And given that, we request that they consider the dissolution of our relationship only as a true last resort in order to preserve our safety. In our communities, the lack of effective mechanisms to hold or resolve conflicts often result in compounding harms growing out of already challenging situations. We commit to humanizing practices in situations of serious conflict, humanizing ourselves and one another. In experience of harm and victimhood, we have the right to feel heard, but do not have the right to hurt and traumatize, even from a place of righteousness and woundedness. So we commit to doing our best to humanize one another and anyone else involved, and we ask this council to catch us and hold us accountable for our words and our actions, especially if we feel hurt. The purpose of this is not just minimizing harm to each other, but also minimizing harm to our communities, and holding us accountable in times when we might feel hurt is a way that the council can support our entire community. While the council is for very serious scales of conflict that we do not anticipate, all relationships have tension, and as part of our commitment to protect the relationship, we also commit to good faith engagement in conflict transformation practices between the two of us, including
preemptive conflict mitigation through continual work of self-awareness, personal healing, and community support, including close, transparent friendships and therapy. Real-time mutual validation, assumption of best intent, contextualization, and de-escalation through the practices of receiver-oriented communication and language mentioned in the communication section above. Post-conflict follow-up around needs, support, requests, and commitments, both with one another and with relevant supportive community members. And finally, the long-term work of engaging in ways that release any cumulative harm, hurt, or resentment, and truly transform conflict into deeper trust, including the embodiment, somatic, nervous system work, which is so much more challenging and easier to avoid.
That's true.
The final section is called Embodying Change. What does that mean?
Need we say more?
We can only understand our capacities as deeply as we understand ourselves. As we engage in this journey of co-liberation, it is our intention to better understand ourselves and one another. This will perforce lead to evolutions of our capacities and boundaries. Just as we consent to being shaped by each other's feedback and influence, so do we accept the evolutions in one another's capacities. For the sake of ourselves and our union, we commit to being like water, in that we will work to flow together and to shape our capacities to the continuance of our union and emergence of each of our liberation. We joyfully commit to one another and our union until such a time as each of our capacities prevent us from continuing to be part of this union. We do not foresee such a time, nor do we foresee our union being broken by death. We plan on being ancestors together. But should death or any other combination of factors lead to the continuance of our union exceeding our capacities or working against our health and wellness, we bow to that eventuality. We have visions of the future. We are working to live our lives as poetry, trying to describe our love to she who is inherently ineffable. It is in our devotion to and longing for this future that we choose each other as partners in undertaking the deepest layers of healing and growth, from an understanding that we each are the future we seek in the bodies that carry us into her. So may it be, and so it is. I love this document so much.
I kind of want to cry.
I realize that we each of us in our work spend a lot of time using language in ways that are outward facing. And this document, I know, is just us using language with each other in a way that might be hard for some folks to follow, might require listening to once or twice. But, oh, do I love it.
It's very sweet. I can already feel some subtleties in there where I'm like, oh, I think we've grown.
Yeah.
Just some little parts of it. I'm like,
Almost every time we go back and read it, we change something. It is alive. We change it
yeah,
often.
yeah.
What stood out to you?
I think noticing where there might be an area where the language that we chose feels like a bit restrictive. It still feels true, just a little snugger. A lot of the rest that still feels very true and kind of open and fluid in this particular way. I think small. Small. And I also, you know what, I appreciate the review because there's still quite a lot to grow into.
Yeah.
I'm kind of like put more wood in the fire.
I'm so warm.
You're warm.
I'm like 1,000,000,000 degrees.
Are you nervous?
I think I'm just warm. So, from that depth of contract, and you see both of our love of words, I'm sure those of you who are more familiar with my work can hear Estephanie's influence in all of that, the poetry and the power. From those depths of commitment and the way that we approach our relationship, you can see why we have a lot of check-ins. Our weekly check-in these days, our check-in processes are constantly evolving, just like the contract. We pay attention to what's working and what's not. Our current practice has a couple of different moving pieces. We, every week, take a little journal entry. We record anything major that happened that week, anything big emotionally or logistically in our lives. Morgan, chill. It's not okay. Do you want to talk about how this relates to our check-ins? I'm struggling.
Well, maybe because, just so y'all know, our two dogs are extremely emotionally needy. And they're both not on the couch, and that is unusual.
And upsetting.
And upsetting to them. And so one is panting and looking at us desperately. And the other one is curled up but giving the side eye.
Yep.
And every now and then tries to come up and puts his head on one of us.
So if you see us laughing at in-jokes, that's what it is. The dogs are being ridiculous.
Yes. What were you saying?
From that scope of our relational agreements, we have a lot of check-ins.
Yeah, and you know what? We just read this long-ass contract. We know it's super long. It's so wordy. Oh my gosh. So I just want to also say that, like, while we might have many check-ins and stuff like that, they're not all super long. You know, like they're like we're going through our emotions sometimes. Like they're really just like a buffer there to catch the things and allow for the space to repeatedly be there as reliance on that.
Yeah.
And it's our weekly check-ins where we're like, all right, what was this week? Because if your lives are anything like our lives, like there's a lot to be carrying day to day, right? People who are paying attention in the world, and there's just a lot to have on our minds and lots to do. I don't know, just so much to do. So really carving out that intentional space is really like our commitment, our continual commitment to each other, and also the commitments and the contract that we co-created as part of our union.
Yeah, and I love data. Have you always loved data, or are you coming to more?
I love social data.
Does this count?
Yes. No, yeah, it counts. It counts.
My little scientist mind loves tracking numbers. So one of the things we do with our weekly check-in is have a whole series of categories, and we track on a scale of -10 to +10. We just off the cuff, when we read these headings, we'll be like, all right, so 0 is true neutral. So if I say, all right, how's our diet this week? Stephanie says 0, that's neutral. If it's 2, that's a little above neutral. If it's -2, it's a little below. And so these are the categories. Oh, we do that every week. Each of us fills out those numbers with each other. And we also have a little journal where we record anything that happens that's major. Any big emotional experiences, any big logistical experiences, just big shifts, because those obviously influence the data. Over time, this gives us an image of our relationship. So we can track the averages, we can track the changes in each category over time. And I make these into little graphs and charts, and I look at them and I see, oh, okay, our diet went up for a while and then it went down for a while. Why did that happen?
Yeah, this spreadsheet is so freaking cool because it was like one of the things that I think how we came to this spreadsheet was like, we need to find a way where we're like not just like falling into a habit or perfunctory thing with our check-ins, with our daily check-ins.
Right.
We're like, how do we actually deepen into the things we genuinely want to deepen into? But whatever, life is life. So yeah, this was like, well, what do we want to catch? What do we want to be sure that we want to catch? And what would prompt us and would be helpful and serve as like a relational mechanism in that way to get us closer to where we want to be in our communication and sharing about processes and different things like that. One thing that I want to just like slightly tweak a little bit in what you said was about the journaling part. I want to be clear that it's perhaps it is big things, but perhaps a little bit it's maybe less big things and more so like what is impactful. So it could be small, but it's like this is really impacting me this week. So I just wanted to add that little tweak there, big or small.
Big impacts.
Yeah, and so I also really love this spreadsheet. I love it because one, we can add things as we go. We're tweaking all the time. Also, it's color coded, so it's kind of pretty. So every time, what's the system that you have? It's like
so
where it hasn't moved, it's like stayed a color or something.
Yeah, if it's the same as it was last week, it's in purple. And if it's a higher number than it was last week, then it's in a shade of green. You don't need to give that kind of feedback, dog.
Stop trying to repress this feedback.
So the deeper the shade of green, the bigger the jump. So if it went from a 0 to a 1, that's a very pale green. If it went from a 0 to a 10, that is the darkest possible green. And the same thing's true on the declining side. So if a metric went from a 5 to a 4, that's a very pale shade of red. If it went from a 5 to a -5, that's the darkest possible shade of red. And that gives us a visual metric of change over time so that we can see week by week what the shift is, which creates a natural flag for something for us to pay attention to. So if we see that in a certain category, there's a huge jump, good or bad, that's worth discussing in our check-in. And it gives us a point of reference for something to talk about.
Right. We're like, wait. That's in red. What's up with that?
What's up? Why is that going down? Or if there's any numbers in the negative, we do it. We talk about that. We're like, why is this in the negative? Usually it's pretty clear. But the categories that we currently track are...
So the first one is relational communication. And that's trying to catch like, how are we noticing the ways in which we communicate, like, and the impact that might have, how we're treating it, like, yeah, just how we're treating each other.
Honestly, this is the first one on the list for a reason. It was the first one that crossed our mind. It's the biggest one. Like relational communication is the foundation of the rest of our entire lives. How we talk to one another, how we treat one another defines everything else that happens. So when this is not doing well, that is a huge indicator. And
yeah.
Super important. These aren't numerical. It's not like they're listed by priority.
Yeah.
But that relationship communication one is a big deal. The next one's diet.
I think the spreadsheet as a whole is also a way to hold ourselves accountable. Like when we say we want to be working toward something slightly different, we've named that in some kind of check-in. So it's a way to be like, yeah, okay, so how's our diet doing? Like, how's that goal going or whatever?
I said I wanted to do this with my diet. Am I doing it? This is a time for me to practice accountability with that and ask for support.
Movement. Yeah, this is just like, well, how we both work on the computer a lot. So it's like, are we getting outside? Are we moving our bodies? Are we stretching our bodies? Whatever it is that our bodies need, like, are we giving that to our bodies?
Sleep. Intimacy, which is distinctly different from sexuality. That's a different category on here. So intimacy is how close we are.
Mental health as related to emotional health.
Yeah. Rhythm, which is just how's the arc of our days going? Are we all over the place or are we in a pretty solid, stable day-to-day rhythm?
Sex.
Progress, as in progress on projects. What have we agreed to? What are we doing? What are we working on?
Creativity.
Physical space. Is the space clean, tidy? How does it feel in here?
We've got puppers. So are we in integrity with, the needs of our dogs?
community? How much are we spending time with other people? Do we feel like that need is met?
Personal interests, sense of individuality, interdependence in our relationship.
And the one we just recently added is presence. Can you speak to that at all?
Yeah, presence this is a new one because we are trying to pay a lot more attention to our bodies. Our bodies as messengers, our bodies as treasure chest and keepers in these particular ways, our bodies as water, fire, air, earth, all these things, but just wanting to track how it is that we are allowing our minds and our language to really align with how our bodies are feeling, perhaps, to the extent that we feel comfortable in exploring what our bodies are trying to tell us. So presence is just how are we noticing that? Are we pausing long enough to notice that? How well or how often in particular, like well as in not like A plus, but well as in like paying attention and tending. The need for a pause, perhaps, and to actually practice feeling our emotions. What's going on in the body.
The first name you had for this was leaning into pauses.
Yeah.
It just speaks to that somatic element that you carry so beautifully, where oftentimes both of us are good at being intellectually aware of things that are impacting us, things that are happening in our lives, things that we're feeling even. I will name a feeling, but I won't actually lean into it sometimes. And the way I'm interpreting this is presence, as in leaning into the things that we're feeling, being present with them in our bodies, actually sitting with them and feeling the things instead of just saying, yeah, I'm sad. Yeah, I'm impacted.
Right. And this kind of connects to those daily check-ins too, right? Where they aren't meant to be like super exploratory at the beginning of our weekday, It brings us back to that, to be like, okay, it's a place to catch things, but we're not like diving deep into it. So like we might name an impact and not take the space for it.
Yeah.
So really this is the time to notice that, and then like a kind of commitment to each other and or ourselves, depending on what the impact or situation is.
So I think, if I'm hearing you right, you're talking about two different things. The presence over the course of the week, like how present have we been with pauses over the course of the week, and then our Sunday check-in as another time to intentionally lean into the emotions and impacts that we're having over the course of the week.
If we don't daily, right?
Right.
Like the intention and the desire is for the care that we have in the day. So this also could be a deeper conversation, but what I want to say about it is part of what we had discussed was there's this like, there's a big conflict in our lives, or kind of like in the constellation of our relationships. And we find ourselves very often constantly impacted by this and lack of accountability related to the situation. It's kind of in our faces a lot.
This is outside of our relationship.
Yeah. And, you had made a comment about being annoyed about something. And I was kind of like, yeah, you know what? Me too. And we kind of like sat with that for just a minute and be like, yep. And us, like, we talk about this a lot, right? Where like it's present in our life, that impact often, and that like annoyance about that thing. So we didn't even take the time to be like, why? We know why, like in this particular way. And also how great we are at intellectualizing the things, right? So I think all of those things impact one another and compound to then create this atmosphere sometimes in our relationship where we're just like, yeah, well, that is what it is. And we kind of move on, like, on to the next topic in a way that this is supposed to catch an opportunity for both of us to be like, oh yeah, like let's sit with one another in that. Let's actually acknowledge or like lean in closer to that, as opposed to this glazing that can so easily happen.
Which is a thing that happens. All of these are reactive to things that have happened in our relationship, where both of us have the capacity to check out. It looks different for each of us. For me, it's like getting really deep into my keyboard, doing a whole bunch of intellectual work and writing and typing and just kind of being gone in this way. And for you, you can speak to it, please. What does dissociation look like for you?
I think it looks like a lot of things, like perhaps procrastination of doing other things around the thing as opposed to the thing. I think some numbing to glazing over totally, not having like the bandwidth to lean in or pause. And even more so, the piece that I really wanted to bring into this was the ways in which we individually might not give the time for the pause and might not give the time for the feeling, simultaneously is helping train us to also ignore that for the other.
Yeah.
And not creating distance in the relationship. And, my understanding is that this relates to like what emotional bids can look like, but I'm not sure if that's the entirety of noticing that essentially it just creates distance. It helps a larger gap.
Yeah, and it's pronounced and noticeable and cumulative.
Right.
You are typically a super animated, playful person around the house. You're like very funny and very bouncy. And so when you start to dissociate or how'd you put it, glaze or numb a little bit,
Yeah.
it's pronounced. All of a sudden you're like quieter and more subdued in this way. One of the reasons I love our daily check-ins is that it's a space for you to name if you are dissociating and why. Like, I feel overwhelmed with work in this way. I feel this conflict is really on my mind. And that lets me set down my insecurity that it's me or that it's our relationship. So that level of daily transparency and communication contextualizes the things that we're running into in a way that's super grounding for me.
Yeah.
And like you're saying, if we let that go, it builds, and it builds into this sense that, people talk about, what do they say, like roommates or just cohabitating in spaces as opposed to being in a relationship. I find it really tricky to know how to differentiate because we inherit this model of relationships from Disney, that relationships are supposed to be constantly this super like vibey love thing. And especially for folks who work from home like we do, we spend a lot of time just sort of in different parts of the house minding our own business. I have an insecurity that we're separating and we're like drifting away from each other when that happens. I end up feeling like, am I doing enough? Am I connecting with you enough? Am I upholding my role? Am I part of our contract in our relationship? Or am I dissociating or getting too deep into my work? And with the incredibly horrible role modeling that we all had around relationships, I don't know where that line is. I don't know where to balance it, because I know that when I compare a healthy relationship to the Disney model of relationship, it's going to look a little bit like being a roommate sometimes. But then there's obviously a point on that where we're so dissociated or checked out that we are actually not upholding our relationship and not engaging with one another in a way that's healthy or maintains that connectivity. Where is that?
Yeah. And I was going to say too that I really love this particular last top theme for the spreadsheet that we have for data collecting, because beyond just like, oh, are we doing that for ourselves, the pausing and leaning in, it's related to the check-in as a whole as well, an opportunity for us to also, the relationship goes both ways. It's both like we have self-responsibility, self-accountability, like how are we paying attention to ourselves and our processes to then invite the other one in.
Yeah.
Right. And really taking seriously responsibility in that. But also this duty, this loving duty to like draw.
Yeah.
We talk about that a lot, is drawing from one another as well. Like, and so the check-ins and this data collecting thing is an opportunity to not only for self be like, oh, well, I don't know, I leaned into pauses. I was noticing more and more. Or like, ooh, now that I think about it this week, I really cannot name a time when I have.
Yeah.
And it's also perhaps an opportunity for me, in that case, that was you. So for me to then lean in and think like, oh, there was actually a moment where I did notice, and there was something that you had said that I had just completely ignored. And that we've been talking about this lately too, so maybe I'm just bringing in a little bit into the space, being a way in which, one, I think we can honor like the protective mechanism in that.
Of ignoring.
And also like the disassociation and the numbing and all of that. I really want to honor that, as we're navigating these societies and our traumas.
We're watching genocide in real time. We're watching the rise of fascism. It's very difficult to be fully emotionally present all the time, potentially dangerous, potentially like burnout, exhaustion. So there's a way in which dissociation sometimes is really valuable. And I agree, like honoring that, not damning all dissociation.
Yeah. It's protective in this way. And in the same way that it can be protective, we can honor that. It can also be dismissive. It can also be weaponized. It can also be, all these other things. So just want to bring that acknowledgement here to say that the importance, especially within our contract and the commitments that we have to one another, that within that context, my ignorance is or feels like a form of neglect of the relationship. Our ignorance to an opportunity to pause and lean in more, the more that I notice, the more that it feels like a bit of neglect of self. I can honor the fact that it might be protective. And I think the more that I'm noticing, the more that I'm like tracking, the more that I'm like, oh, this thing is happening. And look at the ways in which it also is impacting my partner and my partnership and my ability to show up in it, to draw out. Not that is my full responsibility, but it feels like part of the reciprocal relationship that we're committing to.
And this is what you were speaking to earlier about what we're practicing, where if we are only in that dissociative model or too far in that direction, we're practicing ignoring our own emotional needs and our partner's emotional needs. It brings us up to this concept that we talk about a lot of returning to points of tension, returning to things that have come up in our relationship in the past. If one of us names something as a request of the other returning to that request in future check-ins.
Yeah.
And how that builds the sense of connection. So if I come to you and I say, this thing is impacting me from your behavior, and the next week you come around and say, hey, this thing that I was doing, you mentioned was impacting you. Can we talk about that? That act of returning to it builds a sense of trust and connectivity.
Absolutely. Because the absence of that is power. The absence of that and the absence of the returning and also time going by, that equation together is like a use of power that can easily be weaponized. And I think often is in relationships.
I think a lot of people might think of that as just somebody being forgetful or somebody being a little neglectful or a little out of touch with our needs. But you're framing that failure to return to a subject that's been brought up as an act of power over.
I think both the failure to return and time passing.
Yeah.
Right? Because if time is passing and I'm failing to return, that's in my court. Right? Like I am now neglected. Like, right. I'm in it. Yeah. A power over. Because it's different. And what we mean by return to can also look, it doesn't necessarily mean like fixing the thing or addressing the thing. It means, hey, you mentioned that thing last week and I just want you to know that I'm still thinking about it and I need more time.
Yeah.
More time passes. Hey, I know that more time has passed and I haven't come back to this thing. I'm just really struggling and maybe I need a little bit more support with that.
Right.
Or I just need a little bit more time. And maybe that sparks a different kind of conversation at that point. But the lack of that can cause harm.
Yeah.
Never mind in a systemic way.
Yeah. I think one of the largest things that's frustrating in the long-term relationship is when it feels like we're having the same conversation over and over again for years. And I suspect this is something that all people in long-term relationships navigate some way or another. Figuring out how to support. If you're bringing something to me over and over again, me really practicing picking up the awareness of that and beginning to engage with it more, even if all I can do at that point in time is say, hey, I'm still aware of this. Hey, I know you brought this to my attention and it's on my mind. I know I'm still haven't addressed it. It's not wholly resolved. Shifting the expectations of growth of each other to scales of years, because the things that are most frustrating in any kind of long-term relationship are always going to be the deepest wounds in each of us. So healthy relationships bring up the hardest parts of all of our pasts. That's healthy. That's beautiful. It's guaranteed to make frustrating conversations over time because that stuff doesn't change overnight or over months. So shifting it's that when I'm asking something serious of you, expecting that to take years and expecting us both to show up and pick up those things in return. And then I think part of that is also navigating, if it's something that I'm bringing up over and over again, and it's really a challenge for you to meet in that way, how do I shift my own expectations so that I'm not just locking myself into a sense of failure over time or resentment, and really just say, oh, we're taught this model where I'm expecting to meet all of my expectations in this one relationship. And if this is something that I'm constantly coming to you and asking for, and you can't actually like show up to in a way, how do I meet that need myself? This is tricky work because it breaks our sense of what we're taught relationships are supposed to be. In this, it's another piece that we could get into here, which is that we don't have sexuality with anyone outside of our relationship. And we're emphatically not monogamous in the traditional sense.
I was going to say, it's like, how do we meet that need within ourselves and or in community?
Exactly.
Right.
And it starts to be, I think, the strengths of polyamory in this particular way. And while that's not something that we practice in terms of having other partners in a sexual sense, it is a thing that we practice in terms of making sure that we're having a diversified emotional community that we're meeting our needs with. So having close friendships, having levels of intimacy with friendships and community that are not common for a lot of monogamous couples, and breaking out of the expectations like we started with about relationships being about control and being really, it's just a different mindset, as you think is clear in our contract. But within that, there's an element of being able to meet our needs ourselves and meet our needs in community in ways that support our relationship and make our relationship stronger. Where if we are stuck in a model where all of our needs have to be met by our partner, what a little trap.
Yeah, and how boring.
And how boring.
Yeah.
But you're talking about those elements of power, and it feels like it would be inappropriate not to talk about navigating positionality in our relationship. We have very different identities. We have a lot. It's funny. There's large sections of overlap in our backgrounds. We both grew up dirt poor and with a lot of abuse, and that creates some shared common ground. And there's huge differences. You grew up in the Caribbean and in urban environments, and I grew up a dirt poor redneck in the woods. And while I have most of the most privileged identities that a person can have, you have very few. And that leads to, what is it? It's just things to pay attention to.
Yeah. And I will also say, it leads to various things to pay attention to 100%. Also, just want to make it clear that I agree. The identities and positionalities that I hold, how did you put it just now?
You have very few privileged identities.
Yeah. I want to be clear that that's just for your listeners, is not a binary.
Right.
It's not that I have privileged identities or I don't. I very much exist on the scale of privilege and oppression at that intersection. So it really matters, like, who we're talking about.
Yeah.
And I think that there's in many ways mirrors that we hold to one another that speak to some of the most on the scale of privilege and oppression. I think speaks to further ends of that scale.
Yeah.
And by further ends of that scale, also, like, I feel like has a lot of weight, like most challenging, where like in the mirror that I hold is very much you looking into what is whiteness.
Yes.
As a system and a construct, and how that shows up in our relationship and in communities through your body and perception and way of thinking, being, however that's manifesting. And I think for me, the mirror that's being held is, let me backtrack. Maybe what I'm trying to say is the mirrors on those scales and the weights behind them, given our identities and the way that we move and think and look through the world, both the work that is being asked of us both is how to humanize and naturalize each other. It's much easier on a systemic scale for me to humanize, naturalize resonate with other people of the global majority.
Yep.
Like this, there's a shared reality, there's a shared solidarity that rarely needs to be spoken. I'll leave that at that. That really needs to be spoken. And I feel like when I look into the mirrors that you hold for me, I am faced with some ancestral weight.
Yeah.
In this particular way.
Yeah. It's heavy. There's a way in which it's a lot to hold. It's a lot to carry. It asks a great deal of us. And there's a way in which I am so immensely grateful for it, because it means there is no room for anything to really ride beneath the surface. The extremity of the differences in our identities means that, and our personalities and who we are, means that we're just looking at that all the time.
Yeah.
And those dynamics would be present if either of us was dating someone with much more similar identities.
Yeah.
The same learning that we need to face in the mirrors that we hold up to one another would still be waiting for us. It would just be harder to see.
Right.
So there's a way in which it's just something that I'm immensely grateful for. Your analysis, your awareness, the mirrors that you hold up to me, what you ask of me, and the commitments in our contract. Because one of the pieces in that contract is that commitment to mutual humanization. And I know what that work asks of you. This is something we talked about a lot early in our relationship. I was like, are you sure you want to do this work of leaning into the continual humanization and love, embodied love of a white man in this way? And you were like, yeah, I'm in.
Yeah.
Okay, I trust you. So when we talk in that contract about how our relationship is the work of healing the world, that's not abstract. It's literally working to heal the ancestral traumas that people who look like me and my ancestors perpetrated against your ancestors. What is that? How do you hold that in a marriage?
I really love the line in our contract where it's like this commitment to betrayal of privilege.
Yes.
Betrayal of the ignorance, while simultaneously using the systems toward the world building that we need.
Yeah.
In some ways, not always, but some ways.
Yeah. And if we're not engaged in that perpetual betrayal of the ignorance and legacies of harm that we inherit, our relationship wouldn't work.
Yeah.
I think that's true of everyone. I think that our relationship, our identities just shine a spotlight on it in our relationship.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, in case it's helpful, I think wanting to emphasize and continue to bring in what we started to chat about, which is there are two mirrors here. And while in some ways it feels like, oh, well, you obviously have the most work to do, I also don't know if that's true, right? I feel like I still have that question. I know that the work from that systematic lens, I know that the work that's being asked of both of us is both great and immense and as deep and powerful and needed, just from different angles. Mm-hmm. There's a quote I was rereading in Decolonizing Wealth about a reminder in the ways in which when we are not dignifying the other, we inherently are not dignifying ourselves.
Yeah.
Vice versa. And so I think about that a lot in our relationship, where that just feels very clear. And like you said, there's like no turning away from that. There's a lot of gymnastics that would need to happen in our current and historical society for that to be blissful.
Right. Ignored. I was thinking about this when we were reading through our contract, because there's that section that talks about how even when we feel hurt, even if we've been harmed, we don't have the right to cause harm.
Yeah.
And that was you. You put all of that in there.
Yeah. I've been learning a lot. I've been learning a lot.
Is there anything else you want to talk about? Anything else on your heart?
I think that there's a lot that we can unpack. We've had 5 years and more of friendship, at the very least, of conversations that have been really deep and eye-opening. And I don't know what else comes to mind. I feel like there's a plethora of things.
I did want to ask.
What you want?
I've had this developing public platform for years that I've been trying to gently invite you to engage with. When I invited you to do this podcast, you said, yeah, I would like to do that. I was wondering why.
For many reasons. One of them is that, your ask was around sharing our contract. And I know that I've been hearing you talk about that for years. And also hearing you express that that's like a question in your comments a lot.
People ask a lot.
Yeah, in your DMs. And I feel really honored by our contract. It feels like a very low-hanging fruit, and being like, well, of course I would do that. I don't need to think too much about that in a particular way. I think the other reason also, which maybe gets into a little bit more vulnerable territory here, is that I'm like, how much do I want to say?
Say it. Give us the tea. What do you got?
This is what I'm talking about. The other thing is that I think I was trying to be open and looking for you to being open to the processes and time that it took for you to come to your own realizations about yourself, about your work, about yourself and community, about stories, narratives, self-love, a lot of things. And I think my hesitation was waiting for an opening.
Yeah.
To not put pressure on you, on your process or whatever, that look like. And it's felt like you've really have taken those steps. And that's felt energetically like an invitation for me, because you've invited yourself into that.
Reading between the lines, am I hearing that you didn't want to step in as a shield for me too early in some of that public facing work about my own harmful history, some of that?
Yes.
You wanted me to stand in my own way with that? That makes perfect sense. It's very wise of you.
Yeah. There's one video of yours that I absolutely love, and I forget the title of it, but I think it was early on, where you talk about the harm to self in the narratives that come with being a bad person, or I've caused harm, whatever. And there's a lot of pithy, really important pieces in that video that I knew about, in us being friends, and then stepping into further relationship, we've talked about our insecurities and different things like that. Knew that was part of something big that you've just been working with and processing. And I don't know. I feel like it was one of the most important messages that you've had. There's a lot of important messages that you had, but there's a couple more specific ones, and I wish I had come prepared to share what I thought those were, but perhaps another time. I think that messaging and what was around that felt really important, and also tied to why I wanted to wait for an opportunity in the invitation, but specifically where I saw where you were softening and also inviting yourself into something deeper. Something deeper and also more true in yours.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I know that, obviously, my history has not always been easy for you. What it's looked like is that that's less on the interpersonal scale, where I was very transparent early on when we were getting to know each other, and you knew everything already because we live in the same tiny-ass town. But it seemed like you felt very comfortable with my past yourself, but the layers of how that shakes out in community have often been rough. Is that an accurate summary?
Yeah. What are you asking?
Oh, maybe one thing that might be relevant to ask here is more and more men are voluntarily and not out as having caused harm in different ways. If you were speaking to people who want to date men, do you have any advice for them, for women in particular, who are looking at men who are out as having caused harm? How would you vet them? How would you gauge that? Or do you have any advice for those relationships in that way? It just seems like a whole mess. I don't know how you did that with me, how you came to the conclusions you came to or decided to marry me. You have the highest standards of anyone I've ever known in my life. And I say that as a compliment to myself. I'm bragging. But like, I know that you were testing me and like had judgments.
It's a good question. It's a good question. It's a good question. I don't know if it was testing. Maybe. But what comes to mind is observation. Observing where you were at in your praxis. Like where you were at in practicing being a good community member. Where you were at in practicing being a good neighbor. Where you were at in practicing being a good friend, relative. And I think that what I'd seen was like a willingness to hear and look at that honestly. And that's been certainly true throughout our relationship, now 5 years in past friendship. So knowing each other for 8 years, 5 years into relationship, that has proven to be true. Specifically, like the willingness to really hear impact and willingness to really hear, about, I think you're like a curiosity about yourself in a particular way.
I am very self-absorbed.
No. He said that. No, but I think especially because you had told me and because I knew you already, like there's lots that I saw about you, right, as a community leader. Perhaps that self-absorption was a little part of it. You have this really beautiful, grandiose language. You have a really beautiful, grand part of yourself just walking into spaces. Yeah, I don't know, watching what you did with that. Both early on in our relationship, we really had stepped into, after a couple of years of being in friendship, we had really stepped into a relationship fairly quickly. There was like a lot of intensity around that.
It's a very intense time.
Yeah, it's a very intense time. And also a very clear time, at least for me.
Yeah.
Why? What?
I was like, no, we should wait. And you were like, come here. That was my experience. I'm not saying there were any consent violations. I'm just saying I was trying to be respectful and like hold distance. I had been celibate for a year. And you were like, nah, that's a lot of noise you're making.
That's a lot that you're saying.
Like, okay.
No, really, that okay.
So if that was advice for women looking at guys, am I hearing just good long period of observation from a lot of different angles in community?
I think so. And please, observation is not like word of mouth. Observation is like time spent together in community.
You saw me in a bunch of different relationships and crushes.
Yeah, I saw you and I was like, that's kind of messy. And I wasn't dishonest about that stepping into our relationship. And this is what I'm saying though, is like in observation, watching how you were being and in practice, I'm like, that wasn't all tidy in a bow.
No, it was messy, but not crossing a line for you.
Not crossing a line for me. And again, it's like I'm looking, at least for the type of person that I am, I'm like, how quick are you? Like, and because I know I'm gonna be quick. Like, and I don't mean quick as like to
Yeah.
This is getting out of control. No. But what I'm saying, I'm like, I'm going to be quick. I'm going to be honest. I'm going to be direct.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like looking for how you respond to that.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot that I seen that was very clear. And I'm just like, I don't know about that, you know? And I got better and better at that, even myself and within myself.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel sure of that.
Yeah.
And so really what I was also looking for was how you responded to that. And I think the openness and really like, okay, like this person's telling me something. And also like, I'm curious about that for myself. So tell me more. That's really what I had been looking for. And I think still continue to look for in you. And also like the men around me, other men around me.
You're talking about the curiosity, the introspection, and the willingness to hear impact in particular?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Because I don't need you to be at whatever. I don't even know what the measurement is. I don't need you to be at 100% in your praxis.
Yeah.
But I need you to have the will to change.
Yep.
And what I will also say, if I were to give any advice, especially to femmes of any flavor, is how sure are you of yourself? Because that's really important. And I think that goes into like how are we being good community members? Like, what kind of work are you doing to understand yourself, your own needs and boundaries if you've got them? I'm sure you do. Like, what you're willing to tolerate, what you're not. Like, how do you even hold yourself accountable to the things you say you want to do?
Yeah.
How do you respond to somebody being like, hey, you've got impact? You know, you've made an impact. I feel heard. Like, how are you responding to care?
Yeah.
And invitation.
Yeah.
And also, I also want to know too, like, how are you responding to contempt? Shit that's not yours.
Yeah.
I want to know, like, are you taking that on? Right? Like, are you not certain enough in yourself to be like, that's,
right.
You know, consuming in this way? I'm like, I don't know about that.
No, yeah. I remember early on when we were starting to become romantic and I was talking about, I'm sure I was deeply like terrified and insecure talking about some of my own past and I had disclosed all, but you were like, you just gave me this look and you were like, you think I haven't hurt people? You think I haven't violated people's consent? Like, you think I haven't been there? I know my past. And I was like, oh, this is a different kind of conversation than I was expecting.
Yeah. To be like, and that also I remember leading us, and I know you've talked about this as well, like leading us to the conversations about my own feels about community.
Yeah.
To be like, where I come from, I'm like, not to say that there isn't disposability, but it looks different. I think conflict looks really different. It's rare to be able to turn away from people in a particular way. But how I had the opportunity to move here and I got to leave my exes and those stories behind.
Yeah.
Except every now and then when we're in Boston and I'm like, oh.
That guy.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you for sharing that advice and those thoughts and those stories. Here towards the end of this podcast, it feels much more natural. Like this is how a lot of our conversations kind of are.
Yeah, perhaps a little bit more dramatic and vulgar.
Uh-huh. There's so many examples of awful, awful wedding vows from people on the internet that are just painful to listen to. And because words are like the foundation of so much of our relationship and how we spend all our time, I don't know if I might. I know this is in some ways more personal an ask than even the contract. We didn't record our wedding vows at our wedding. There's no record of them anywhere that I know of.
You ask people?
No, but I have a feeling somebody would have told us if they'd filmed that. We have your little beautiful notebook that you wrote them in. Are you willing to read our vows to each other so that people can hear at least an example of how people with our level of focus on language put wedding vows together? For better or worse.
Yeah,
people might
precision.
hate, you know.
We want precision. You're putting a lot onto those vows.
You can say no.
Mm.
I just figured I'd ask.
Wait, let me look at them real quick. What did I say? So something that I wanted to share too, if we're gonna go down this route, is that this little sweet notebook of mine is actually the notebook that I use for all of my protest speeches and chants.
Mm-hmm.
And something felt really sacred about putting these, scribbling those in here.
Your protest speeches are like little sermons.
Okay.
I'm excited.
I think the other reason why I agreed to the podcast was because TikTok's going away.
Well, there's a silver lining.
I was like, oh, okay.
Even if people got drama, it's not going to last too long.
How did we do this? You went first or I went first?
I think you went first. In fact, I'm pretty confident.
You don't want to go first?
You want to flip it?
I don't know. It was a little bit of a power move of me going first.
It was. I remember. It was pretty hot.
Mm-hmm. I'm nervous.
We're already married.
I know, but... Okay. No, I'm gonna look at you. Okay. No, this is great. This is great. Okay. Oh my gosh. Well, this is now I feel like in a loop because now I'm thinking about how you make fun of me when I stand on cliffs.
I was just thinking about that. I was literally just picturing you on the cliff. Once we filmed Estephanie for 45 minutes standing on a cliff. It was her sister and I. No, I actually have the footage. It was. I had to edit it later. It was incredible. They did eventually jump, but it was a long time.
I promise to uphold our contract to the best of my ability. To really move through this relationship, seeing it as a reflection in the many fractals of creation, including myself. I promise to support the best in you and myself and hold challenges with compassionate inquiry, curiosity, and humanization. I promise to see and bring forth each of our divinities in prayer and practice. I promise to be shaped by you, respect you, co-rise, co-create, and grow in collaboration with you. I will honor you in all the ways I can of the embodiment of that is divine. I also promise to challenge you, to nudge you, always gently towards dignity, and sometimes tell you when you're wrong. As I honor the water in life, I will love you as I love and see water. From the deep soils of the earth to the rain the clouds drop, to the myriad ways of the ocean, I will love water as I love you. I promise to celebrate and affirm you, to be transparent with you, or at least as transparent as I am with myself. I will see you as my other self. I will step through and listen through your words to what you try to show me and your teachings you invite me into. When I am stuck in my pride and trauma, I promise to practice returning. I want to find life's greater truths with you again and again. As we navigate this great unraveling, I promise to forget and remember with you. I tremulously but joyfully step in closer to weave my lineage, community, name, and future with you today. And will step through this portal as your spouse, partner, co-conspirator, and wife. My word is strong.
Mm-hmm. Oof. That last line still hits me the same way it did the first time you said it. Do you want to speak about why you put that in there?
I don't know. I think maybe you could a little bit better.
It's a quote from the peacemaker who founded the Haudenosaunee Confederacy and brought about several millennia of multinational, ecologically stable peace on these lands. And while he was convincing a bunch of different groups of people who had been fighting for a long time to put their weapons down, one of the things he said was, "My word is strong," and committing to the fact that this peace would hold and that people could actually trust the peace that he was creating. And so that's Estephanie referencing the peace of one of the strongest treaties in the history of the world, and one that was broken by colonization, or disempowered by colonization. The Haudenosaunee Confederacy still stands strong, but a lot of their land was taken and a lot of horrible things happened through colonization. And Stephanie's referencing that line as part of our contract in a way that really just speaks to a lot of my insecurities and fears and doubts about whether men and women can even have healthy relationships, whether people from settler colonial lineages, white people, can have healthy relationships with indigenous people. Things that haunt me. Stephanie knew that they were speaking to directly with that line, and so it just carries a lot of weight for me. Ooh, well, now I'm appropriately crying the way I was when I started reading these last time. Stephanie, I vow to uphold every element of our contract to the best of my ability. This means that I will see and support the best in each of us. I will hold each of our divinity in prayer and practice. I will be shaped by you and grow in collaboration and mutual aid and support. I will honor you in every way that I can as the embodiment of the divine and the earth in my life. I will love you as I love the earth, from sunrise dawn chorus to wild storm, wholly and without hesitation. And I will love the earth as I love you with every sunrise and storm. I will be at least as transparent with you as I am with myself. And every part of my life will be open to you, and I will keep no secrets between us. I will listen through your words and teachings into the world that you are inviting me into. Corazón de mi corazón, prometo caminar contigo mientras el mundo gira y hacerlo girar juntos. Tú mi pareja de baile, de crecimiento, de risas y lágrimas. Tú la madre de mi futuro hijos. Tú mi esposa y pareja. En la oscuridad y en la luz, desde hoy en adelante. And as we dance through the weaves of joy and grief, adoration and frustration, I will prioritize our relationship over my own pride and trauma and return to you. I will continue to learn how to engage in ways that build trust so that our tensions build our relational resilience over time. I will practice dialectical anti-fragility with you. As we practice being the divine toward the stable, safe community we all desire, this relationship and our co-liberation will be my highest priorities in all my decisions. It is by these that I will set my bearing at every crossroads. I joyfully weave my lineage, community, name, and future with you today, and walk forward as your spouse and partner. This is my vow and my honor. I love you.
I love you.
Your work is incredible. I often say that my entire body of work is just remedial work to get people to the point where they can understand what you do. Do you want to share where folks can find you?
Yeah, I have a website, and it's called Myco Rising, and I will happily, with discernment, take clients. Those are both organizational and community as well.
Mm-hmm.
So if your organization is navigating tensions, navigating relationships, and yet feeling committed to the work that you're doing, and want to really disrupt the structures in which they exist in, I might be the person for you. I think same goes for community as well. Like, my work is to support community members navigating tensions, especially across positionalities and identities and power dynamics, yet who are committed to being in community in more regenerative, generative ways, in a way that really honors everybody's dignity and also moves everyone towards self-accountability. I might be the person for you too.
Stephanie's incredibly good at their work, helping organizations move into alignment and helping groups of people find pathways out of gnarly situations. It's inspiring.
I'm learning a lot with your help.
All of my work, as people can now see quite clearly, is built on our relationship.
Yeah.
I would be nowhere near where I am today, nowhere near, without your influence. I often feel out of alignment for not citing you directly more, because so many of my videos are straight out of your mouth, or just things that you're saying that I'm interpreting and just saying again. So it feels like a stepping to integrity to be sharing this publicly and talking about our relationship this way, and be like, yes, this is my partner. This is my person. And like, so much of my wisdom comes both from you and from this relationship, as much as I have. So thank you again. Any closing words? Oh, how do you spell your website, and what does Myco Rising mean?
Yeah, Myco Rising is spelled MyCorrising.com. And Myco Rising are mutual beneficial networks of relationships between plants and fungi. And the name of the organization, Myco Rising, is just a play on this word. It is very much the work, like mycorrhizal relationships, is mutually connective and supportive. And so for our liberation across differences, we can only rise together. We can only co-rise, and the work is also personal. It can only be yours. Only you can choose. So this is your co-rising. Or if you were to say it in the first person, my co-rising.
That's so cool.
You're pretty cool. Thank you.
Thank you. And thanks for listening all through that, y'all. Hope it was worth your time.
Hey, if you would like to see our relational contract, you can find it on Jack's Patreon.
You obviously have a caramello in your mouth.
Thanks, little sister.